I was trying to pull it. I couldn't get it.
All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Winnetka Village Council study session for December 13th, 2022. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Ask everybody to mute your cell phones or other electronic devices. And I will ask Rob to do a roll call for attendance.
Trustee Dahlman?
Here.
Trustee Dearborn?
Here.
Trustee Handler?
Here.
Trustee Apatow?
Here.
Trustee Kripe? He's muted on his end.
Andy, you here? Andy,
Is that how you do it, with the microphone next to the phone?
You here?
he's here. Okay,
here.
we got
Okay.
you.
Yeah, and President Rintz.
Here. Okay, Trustee Kripe has provided the required notice that he is initially unable to attend tonight's meeting due to work obligations, but will plan to join in person at some point during the meeting. Our rules provide that Trustee Kripe may participate remotely unless 2/3 of the board objects. Is there any objection?
Nope.
Seeing none, Trustee Kripe may now participate remotely fully in the meeting, and the minutes should so reflect. Okay, item 2 tonight is public comment. If anybody is here who would like to speak on any item not related to the firearms issue, you're welcome to come on up and share your thoughts with us. Seeing none, I will close public comment. I'll hold on one second. Based on the shirt, I think she's here for firearms. Okay. Item 3 tonight is firearm safety follow-up meeting. Tonight, council will be reviewing the village's existing firearm regulations and will discuss potential amendments to the village code. One thing I'd like to say that's going to make this conversation a little different tonight is, and Lauren, I'm sure you can help us out understand this, is that there's stuff going on downstate right now with this new, I don't know what they call the act, but there's work going on downstate right now that could obviously affect, any potential paths we wish to take, because obviously, as we've seen in other circumstances, if there's a state law in effect, and Chief has told us this too, that if he has an opportunity to charge somebody under state law or under local ordinance, state law rules the day. Yeah, and you'll talk about that too. So I just wanted to kind of paint the backdrop that there is stuff going on down in Springfield that could alter the conversation somewhat. So we'd like to start out with village attorney Peter Friedman. He's going to give us an update. And we've also got Chief Hornstein here tonight to help fill in some of the blanks as well. Take it away, Peter.
Press. Thank you. That's press, push, it's the same thing. All right, so I thought I would first just take a step back and review a little bit about the state of the law generally. I know I went through this when we had the last council meeting on this topic, but I thought it'd be a good to do that. Then I will talk about the new bill that was introduced in Springfield and that had a public hearing yesterday, first public hearing, and then talk about review what I wrote in the memo about possible changes to our own ordinance in the village. So first, just again to review, with regard to the regulation of handguns, 2 U.S. Supreme Court cases basically say that handguns and the right to self-defense with a handgun is a protected Second Amendment right. The village obviously has a history with regard to the regulation of handguns, had handgun regulations, decided to repeal those in response to these Supreme Court decisions. And in addition to that case law, the state has, as a matter of authority, preempted the village from adopting and enforcing handgun regulations. So we have the Second Amendment and preemption. Handguns are pretty much off limits for the village. The overall Second Amendment case law has been affected by basically concealed carry law. Illinois, we have a concealed carry statute. The U.S. Supreme Court in July handed down its decision in the Bruen case out of New York, and said in that case, for the first time really, that the Second Amendment protection extends beyond the home, which those earlier cases were limited to protect individuals' right to carry a concealed handgun for self-defense in public. Two things important to know about that case. One, it didn't really affect Illinois because the New York case was, the New York statute and program was what's called a may issue. In other words, when somebody went to New York to ask for a concealed carry or a license or a permit to carry a gun in public, there was a lot of discretion and a lot of affirmative need to show a justification for why somebody needed to carry that weapon. So it was considered a may issue. That's what the Supreme Court fundamentally had a problem with, specifically with that statute. In Illinois, we have a must issue. We have objective standards. There's not a lot of discretion for the state agency that issues the FOIA cards. If you meet the standards, you get a FOIA card. So, and 42 other states have similar statutes as we do. So, on a day-to-day practical level, that case with regard to concealed carry regulations didn't have a lot of effect. But where it did have a lot of effect is it announced a new standard, a new test for how future gun regulations, firearm regulations, are going to be analyzed by the Supreme Court, and all lower federal courts now are obligated to assign that same test. And basically it puts the burden on the government to demonstrate that the challenged regulation is consistent with the historical tradition of firearm regulations. What that means is that the government must demonstrate that the regulation is consistent with the nation's historical precedent, and I'm just reading because it's from the case, historical precedent of firearms regulations in existence at the time of the adoption of the Second Amendment. That's a very different test from what had previously been the case. Bruen's the only case in the Supreme Court that's really analyzed a firearm regulation based on that test, and I'll talk later about how that may impact other things. With regard to assault weapons, in Illinois, as you know, in 2013, our FOIA statute was amended, and it specifically prohibited municipalities from regulating assault weapons, however, including home rule. However, there was a 10-day window which home rule municipalities could adopt assault weapons type regulations. And once they did that, the preemption didn't apply to them anymore. Winnetka at the time adopted a safe storage and transportation set of regulations that are in our code right now. So Winnetka has the ability to first enforce those regulations and amend them if it desires to anywhere in between what we have and an all-out assault weapons ban. Deerfield, very similar situation. They adopted basically exactly what we did with regard to safe storage and transportation in 2013. They converted that into an assault weapons ban that was challenged. And on the issue of whether they had the authority to amend into an assault weapons ban, that was upheld by the Illinois Appellate Court. And the Supreme Court, as you'll recall, tied on whether or not to uphold that appellate court decision, and a tie means that the appellate court decision held, which upheld the Deerfield regulation. The Deerfield regulation was not challenged on Second Amendment grounds. But Highland Park, which obviously also has an assault weapons ban, their regulation has been challenged. The Seventh Circuit upheld it. The Supreme Court denied hearing that case. There was a dissent to that denial, and Justice Thomas said he thinks the court should have taken it, and if they did, thinks it should have been overturned. All of the cases, so the current law in Illinois is that these assault weapons are constitutional. They have not, there's no contrary decision. And I'll get to how that may look in a minute. Since the Bruen case, and coincidentally, since the Highland Park mass shooting, there have been numerous cases challenging assault weapons bans. Highland Park's been challenged. Cook County's been challenged. And also Hawaii, Connecticut, and Massachusetts that have statewide assault weapons ban, they've been challenged too. Those cases are all moving through the courts. We don't have any definitive answer yet about how that's going to work out. As Chris said, the village president said,
Chris is fine. It's my name.
there is a new piece of legislation that was introduced earlier by Representative Bob Morgan. It's House Bill 5855, and it's a version of an assault weapons ban. It amends the criminal code, the article on criminal code with regard to deadly weapons. I'm just going to review it very quickly. It's a very long statute. Chief has it. I'm sure he's read it line for line. But in essence, it is three key points. Unlawful under this statute to manufacture, deliver, sell, purchase, or cause to be possessed an assault weapon, which is defined in the statute similarly to our definition, an assault weapon attachment, a .50 caliber rifle, or a .50 caliber cartridge. It is also unlawful under this under the bill to possess an assault weapon, a .50 caliber rifle, or a .50 caliber cartridge. There is, at least now, a significant carve-out. It's called a pre-possession exemption. And it says if you possess one of the prohibited items prior to the effective date of the law, you can continue to possess it if you file an affidavit within 300 days after the effective date, and provide a sworn affidavit with a FOIA number. So it's not a complete ban. It's a prospective ban in many ways, not a retroactive ban.
But that, not to interrupt, but that is, that's effectively saying, letting police know that who has these weapons, because if you have to have an affidavit to have it, no?
No, there is a provision in there for potential registry.
Right, potential.
Yeah, if I can add just one other
Please, yeah,
thing
go.
that you were going to mention, that it also addresses high capacity, a banning of high
I
capacity
was gonna
mag.
get to
Sorry.
Yep, no, that's all right. Yep. There's also a transfer provision that if you legally have one, before the effective date legally have one, you can transfer it to an heir, person in another state who maintains it in another state, or to a federally licensed firearms dealer. As the chief said, there is a large capacity ammunition ban for the manufacture, delivery, sale, purchase, or possession of a magazine with more than 10 rounds. And there's no continuation rights for those as there are for the actual weapons and the other thing. There's a number of exemptions. Peace officers on duty and traveling to and from duty. I know there's an issue. The retired police officers are not exempted. That's under discussion, as I understand.
That's a problem.
Yeah, if you want
In
to
my
talk about
opinion,
it,
that's a
but
problem.
yeah. Local law enforcement agencies, while equipping peace officers when permitted, jail wardens, kind of practical exemptions. Under the bill, the age for a FOIA card goes up to 21. And the red flag provisions, which is the firearms restraining orders that you've probably heard about. Those right now have a limit of 6 months. Under the bill, it would go to a year. That's a court order removing a firearm. Right now, there's a limit of it. Can't go beyond 6 months. This would extend that to a year. It also requires some cooperation among and assistance from state's attorneys and with regard to the restraining orders.
So after years, does it get expunged from the records so that, like in Highland Park's case, they didn't know?
No, that was not a restraining order. That's the FOIA card application when they deny.
With the red flag, yeah.
Right, but this is a restraining order. This is a court order
Right.
issued by a court that does not get automatically expunged.
I think the controversy was there is that when it came to the application, they didn't take into account some
Tina.
of the family concerns. Right? That was,
Yeah,
yeah,
right.
it
But
was
that
all
was,
about his FOID card application.
yeah, there was no restraining order. There was no, in the Highland Park case.
But there was a red flag issued earlier, but no restraining order, you're saying. But the red flag went away, is what I understood.
It has to do with when the state police receive a clear and present danger form, which looks like this. And under the previous administrative rules, if at the time when the state police received the clear and present danger form, there was nothing in their system that would have precluded somebody from getting a FOID card, they destroyed the document.
Right.
Now, that was an emergency rule that was amended, correct me if I'm wrong, Peter, I think that was in July. I'm
By
sorry,
the
not
governor,
July.
but yeah, administrative
Or
rules.
late July,
Right.
administratively.
Yep.
Although there's still a temporary, the clock is still ticking on that.
Chief Hornstein, one of the other things was that the
Okay.
family had actually chimed
Public
in
comment,
and
okay.
co-signed his FOID card. And part of the reason that one stipulation is in here requiring that to never happen again, that's why there's now a 21 and older for everybody, and there can no longer be a co-signatory of a parent to allow an 18 to 20-year-old to obtain a FOID card, so it's just another layer of a loop that closing.
Exactly. It's a bill. It's not a statute yet. So,
Would, as,
it doesn't say hit it, it says
Red is
push
dead,
it.
green, there you go.
Okay. You wondered why it said push. Okay, don't press, gently. Does the bill address this temporary emergency order extension about the?
From 6 months to a year?
Or the clear, that the records,
Never gets expunged, that's what I was hoping.
well, that the destruction of the records?
Yeah.
I think that, yeah, that's different.
That's
And
not
that- Right,
part of the bill?
and not that I know of.
Okay. I know there's a lot in there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, as I said, the bill was just introduced. January 10th is the last day for the 102nd General Assembly. Right now, in the lame duck session, you know, it takes 60 in the House, 30 in the Senate to pass something. The governor has said he wants it by July 4th. I think Representative Morgan would like it a lot sooner in this session. That's a tall order, given the bill, but, so this bill will change before it's signed, so we just have to watch. If it gets signed, you know, if it
Right.
gets all the way there. But there was a hearing yesterday in Chicago. There's no home rule preemption in the bill. Doesn't really matter that much because the home rule preemption issue was already dealt with in the 2013 statute. And for us, it doesn't matter because we're already, our nose is already under the tent of the preemption issue. Just, this has been asked, the bill does not deal with civil penalties for manufacturers and dealers and sellers. There have been discussions about that. There's a rule under the Illinois Constitution called the single subject rule. That was deemed to be a separate subject from the assault weapons ban provisions. So there is, it is planned that there's going to be another separate bill to deal with civil penalties. There are, further background, there are 2 existing civil lawsuits filed by victims of the Highland Park shooting against Smith & Wesson. But there's a barrier to those, as I think you all know, under federal law. The Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act prohibits civil liability actions against businesses that design, manufacture, market, distribute, or sell firearms. There's a limited exception to that when there's when a company knowingly violated a state statute applicable to the sale or marketing of the product. That was successfully used recently in the Sandy Hook litigation. It required that those victims show, and it's going to require the Highland Park victims to show also that there was some violation of state law, the Illinois Consumer Fraud Act, or the Business Practices Act. So that's all also working its way through the courts. All right, to the Winnetka Code. And this is all described in greater detail in our memo, but handguns we've talked about, there's not much we can do there. Parental responsibility, in many ways it's preempted certainly with regard to handguns. As we indicated, we found in Chicago they do have a parental responsibility that on its face applies to handguns. We talked to the Corporation Counsel's office. That statute was enacted, that code provision was enacted prior to 2013. They are not enforcing it. It just hasn't been removed from the books in Chicago. One thing I would say is what's not prohibited and what's not preempted is, one, public education campaigns with regard to handguns. You're not regulating handguns, you're educating, so that's an open possibility. And two, parental responsibility with regard to assault weapons. We are allowed to regulate assault weapons. So to the extent there was a desire, to the extent there was a desire to do something with regard to parental responsibility, it would be limited to assault weapons. The definition of assault weapons we think is good as it is. It's identical to Highland Park's. Highland Park's has been upheld by the courts, so to the extent we want to keep that, there's no need to change it. The definition of large capacity magazines for assault weapons only, we would just, again, right now it's not 100% clear that that definition or that provision applies only to assault weapons. It can only apply to assault weapons. It can't apply to other weapons like handguns. So we would recommend that that be amended. With regard to safe storage and transportation for the assault weapons, we just recommended there's a little bit of overlap between the two main provisions, one on safe storage, one on transportation. The safe storage talks a little bit about transportation in it, and our recommendation was just we should have what's allowed for safe storage, and then when it's not being stored, i.e. being possessed and transported, what should that say? I don't think we changed substantively, we just thought they should be separate, so it's clear. With regard to transportation, there is a provision that has that's disjunctive. It has ors, and if we wanted to be more restrictive, Highland Parks has and the transport. What it is the exception to the transportation prohibition is if the weapons are broken down in a non-functioning state or are not immediately accessible or are unloaded and enclosed in a case, etc. Some municipalities, including Highland Park, make that an and rather than ors. Our provision on surrender of handguns and ammunition, again, just clarifying changes. I don't think we changed anything substantive, but just thought there was a little bit of overlap there. Firearms dealers, our ordinance prohibits any business from any firearms business. There's a distinction between sales and business, and sales may be more broad, but at the same time, the city of Chicago bans sales, and that was overturned as a violation of the Second Amendment. So businesses probably we want to be. Naperville is being sued because after the Highland Park shooting, they adopted a assault weapons ban on the sale of assault weapons. They've now been sued over that ban. So our recommendation is to to the extent there was a desire to do anything with that, we should probably wait and see how that litigation winds up.
So these lawsuits are coming from, I assume, NRA but is.
And
I
some
s-
residents.
I assume these are happening in every state, these challenges. That's a challenge in every state, or they just pick the states where they think they can get the most?
Well, if it's Second Amendment, they go to federal court, and and that would apply. But, just because a federal court in the Seventh Circuit, where we are, says one thing,
Yeah.
another circuits could say another thing. That's why
Got
it's
it.
all going to wind up at the Supreme Court at some point.
Okay.
And then with regard to the we wrote in the memo, to the extent there is a desire to look at an assault weapons ban, there are two alternatives. We can do it in our own ordinance, or we could potentially do it in coordination with the county. The county, and I'll start with our ordinance. Again, there are samples of assault weapons bans that have been upheld in Illinois, Highland Parks and Cook County. So it's not a difficult endeavor to create that ordinance if that was the desire of the council, of the board. The other alternative is the county has an assault weapons ban that's been upheld. Some municipalities have considered entering into an IGA with the county, either to have the county enforce that ban within the municipal boundaries, or alternatively to have the municipality have the authority to enforce the county within its borders. Chief, I don't know any who have actually done that, but it is an option. And I know you probably have thoughts about that.
Yeah, so I'm not aware of any of our neighbors. We haven't experienced that, and I'm not aware of any
Right.
of our neighboring police departments that have experienced that. And I would have concerns about handing that authority, responsibility to another law enforcement agency coming into our village
Right.
to perform
Right.
that function.
Yeah, and vice versa, us enforcing the county's ordinance. There's a legal issue on us enforcing the county's ordinance. Our regulations are not identical to the county's. There's a general rule in our constitution and in statute that when a municipality's ordinance is inconsistent, when a home rule municipality's ordinance is inconsistent with the county, ours controls. So right now, ours would control. We don't have an assault weapons ban. So there'd have to be some code changes as well, even to allow us or the county to enforce that ban in Winnetka, if that's an avenue we wanted to go down. The last thing I would say, I said this before, assault weapons bans are being litigated. Several in Illinois, Hawaii, Massachusetts, Connecticut, state bans are being litigated. It's not clear how that goes in the U.S. Supreme Court. There's definitely at least there's three probably votes to uphold those bans. There's definitely 3 to not uphold those bans. The thinking is that Justice Kavanaugh and Roberts may be swing votes. Pure speculation. It depends what the actual ban is that gets up to the Supreme Court and then how they evaluate it. So it's really difficult to predict. And finally, we have there are fines. I think a maximum fine under our ordinance is $750. We're home rule. We can have increased fines. The City of Chicago, for example, has fines for violating their firearms regulations of anywhere from $1,000 to $5,000. There's no real limit. When you get too high, though, courts tend to, it starts to act like a penal statute, criminal statute, as opposed to an ordinance violation. So there is some limit, but there's no question if we wanted to increase our fines, we would have the authority to do that.
Is that just one fine for any violation of the code? So transportation, storage.
You can have different fine amounts for different provision of the code. 750 max,
For any violation.
general provision.
Have we ever, fine?
Under our firearms regulations? Oh, not that I know of.
I mean, just anecdotally, anything we would have had would have been a state charge. And we have routine fines all the time for other ordinances, particularly when, you know, we
Yeah.
have through administrative hearing process, but normally if it's a criminal violation, that's a UUW, it's going to Skokie, going to court.
That concludes my report.
I'd love to hear your thoughts, Mark. You know, this is I'm sorry. And this is a perfect time for you. I mean, you've got the perfect get out of jail free card. And honestly, for the past month, as we've been thinking about this, the one thing I really wanted to hear about was from you, because I knew you have some sort of, now you've got almost immunity to actually speak your mind here in this room. And I mean it. I mean, you know, and I know you have to be very careful in your position, but, you know, I don't know how everybody else at the table feels, but I get a sense that we're kind of floundering on the issue altogether just because there are so many components to it. You've got the Second Amendment and the federal lawsuits. You have what the state is cooking up down in Springfield. You have this special exemption that we have because we responded in those 10 days. My head is spinning. And how much of this will make a difference? Because it's easy to, you know, it's very easy to write ordinances and do things like that, but the key thing is, yeah, I guess there's two pieces. One is to make a statement about what our community thinks, but to me, more importantly, is preventing awful and wrongful deaths from firearms in the hands of the wrong people. So, I mean, where would you guide us
Glad you came today.
if you retired and became a consultant and came back here?
Well, you know, first off, I'm going to give you the same answer today that I give you a year ago, or if I was staying a year from now. I mean, the fact that I'm retiring it doesn't matter about what my thoughts might be on it, but I appreciate that. Look, this is an incredibly difficult needle to thread. And the fact that you all at this table are struggling with it, I can tell you that a lot of respected, experienced law enforcement professionals are struggling with this as well. You might be surprised to know that there is some divisiveness, if you will, or disagreements about what the right thing is to do. Even amongst law enforcement professionals and my peers, where we have conversations about this. And you have, for example, you have the International Association of Chiefs of Police, who does have a public position on it, which is they support an assault weapons ban, okay, on a national level. You'll get differences of opinions from other police leaders in different communities. Some communities are rural, some are more urban, and people are going to have different takes on that. So I think the one thing everybody can absolutely agree upon is we want to do everything we can to prevent anybody, regardless of age, from getting their hands on any firearm where they have no business possessing a firearm, period. So in doing that, I do think that decisions being made at the state level does give you the most meat on the bone, because it's universal, and you get statewide support with it. So the fact that there is legislation that has started, I think, is definitely a step in the right direction to try and improve things. Now, I realize people can debate things in this particular House bill that are really good, and maybe some things that aren't so good. But it is a step in the right direction for starting the dialogue and trying to move the train down the tracks, to your point, to try and make the communities safer. Specifically about assault weapons, do I get it for both sides of the argument? Absolutely. Absolutely. I love the idea of making it more difficult for somebody to get a FOID card. Some people, again, have no business owning any weapon, any firearm, let alone an assault rifle. So I get that part of it. I also understand the position of very responsible citizens who are law-abiding and know how to secure their weapons safely, and they're the last people in the world where whatever firearm they possess is going to create a problem in society, because it's not going to happen. So there's people that feel very strongly about that as well. In a perfect scenario, would I love it where somebody couldn't get their hands on an assault weapon and go out and cause havoc? Absolutely. Do I ever want one of my officers to go and have to face that? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. No question about it. So hypothetically, if you could do it in a way to keep it out of the hands of people that don't have any business owning them, great. I can't tell you exactly the best way to do that, because there's such diverging opinions on that. So I don't know that I specifically I didn't give you a yes or no answer on that, because again, it's really difficult to thread the needle on this.
I wasn't expecting yes or no, I just wanted more perspective on it from somebody who deals with this day in and day out. Yeah, Rob.
I guess I'm trying to, and within those laws, or what you were just reading, and even in here, which I have not read yet, going after the guns without going after the red flag permanency, without going after some of the mental. I think in New York they're actually finally doing that, where they're being stricter on forced evaluation, mental health evaluation for certain potential. I don't know if it's with void cards or what, but I know that they're finally strengthening those, and that's my concern is you can have all the regulations you want, but without the two, without red flagging people and permanence and mental health going along with it, it's going to be how hollow it will be.
Yeah. Might be good to hear from our guests, and then we can kind of roll up our sleeves and see if there's anything to be done here. Would anybody in the audience like to share your thoughts with us?
I mean, I'm happy to share.
Come on up.
I don't know if you need me to stand or whatever, but
You can just go to the podium. That's
okay.
fine.
I'm Lauren. You probably all know me by now. First, I would just love to say, don't misinterpret the small group of people here for lack of engagement or lack of interest. We have been asking so much of our volunteers in the last month and a half. Elections work. We got, I think, 144 candidates that we campaigned for elected that are all gun sense candidates. There's just been so much work that's been done. So there's exhaustion, and then there also is an enormous effort to support the legislation that that is moving forward, hopefully at a lightning speed right now. And there has been a lot of strategy behind putting it forth really close in the deadline to the January lame duck session. And the reason that was done with a really short timetable is if a piece of legislation passes during the lame duck session, it takes effect immediately. So for something like an assault weapons ban, that's really important because in the regular session, it takes 6 months before it goes into effect. And what we see is as soon as a piece of legislation even gets whispered about, people go out and buy these weapons in mass. So the strategy behind the timing is very intentional, and hopefully it will be smart in the end. But I did sit in on the hearings yesterday. We've been really actively getting the people involved in testifying in front of the committee hearings. And the things that I heard in reading through people's testimony, approving it, and hearing them in person deliver this testimony, the stories are unspeakable. They are so devastating. And when I say unspeakable, these are stories that no one should ever have to tell. So we're just continuing to be very motivated. I believe in my heart that there are the votes in the House to pass this piece of legislation. The Senate is a little bit more tenuous. We actually just lost a senator. He passed away this week. So there's a little bit more of a question in the Senate, but I think there's a really, really good chance that this is going to pass. There is, as you alluded to, there are actually a few other standalone pieces of legislation that they're hoping to pass shortly thereafter. There are other working groups that are working on community violence intervention. The piece of legislation that deals with industry accountability is interesting. It really focuses, as far as I can tell, on deceptive marketing practices on the part of the gun industry. So it's not quite as like sweeping as I would hope it would be, but again, it's like everything is incremental in this work, and the thinking is if you open up that door to any accountability, then there's another door that opens thereafter. So that's another part of it. And then more recently, we've been talking to them about safe gun storage and a specific standalone bill about safe gun storage. So I know we keep talking about all of these different components, assault weapons bans, across the gun gun trafficking. There's so many different components to it, but I get the sense that there's a receptiveness here to education about safe gun storage, which our schools, our elementary and our middle schools, are already doing a really good job of. And I get the sense that there are not a large number of assault weapons in our town to begin with. So maybe where our focus should be is on making sure that people are locking up their firearms. Because, of course, you don't want any of your officers to be encountering people who have any of these weapons in an unsafe situation. But the easiest thing for us to do is to educate and convince people that that is the first line of defense for our community. And 54% of people don't lock up their guns. So going back to what you were saying before about law-abiding people who are responsible gun owners, I agree. There's no reason that they shouldn't have a firearm. But the unfortunate fact is that 54% of people are leaving their firearms unsecured and loaded. So there is an enormous amount of access for children to find these and commit self-harm, unintentional shootings. There's like this low-hanging fruit that we could be picking off pretty easily. And if it comes in the form of education, and that isn't going to get our town sued, right? And it doesn't put us on the path to a Supreme Court lawsuit, then shouldn't we be doing that? It just seems like such an easy place to start. And again, because our schools are already doing it, I feel like it's something that we can build on, but it needs to be consistent because, again, the 54% of people who don't lock up their guns, that behavior is deeply ingrained. It's their parents and their grandparents and their great-grandparents that all didn't lock up their guns, and they all think, well, I lived, and my parents lived, so it's not that big a deal. But with the issues that our kids are facing right now, with mental health issues and the increase of suicide rates among teens being up 50+% in the last decade, this is just a no-brainer, right, for us to tackle. So I'm sure there's many more things that I could tell you about, but that's sort of where I'm netting out. I really do think that a lot of the issues we're talking about tonight hopefully will become moot on January 11th when this piece of legislation passes. So I'm just really hopeful that that gets sort of taken out of the mix altogether, and we can just know that that gets done.
What have you found out about safe storage since we were last in the room? Because I know there's been a lot of talk about it. There continues to be talk. Interestingly enough, I saw a TV commercial last night.
Yeah.
From some industry, and it was a woman basically saying, lock up your gun, and she had the fingerprint gun safe.
Yep.
It's like, there it is, right? I
Sure.
mean,
Yeah, I mean, it was
the first step towards some sort of education out there. But how do, it's easy for us to educate the non-gun owning children in our community because the school districts have a captive audience. I mean,
yeah.
they're in the same place every day, and it's easy to bring them together and talk to them about this stuff. But how do we get the message out to the adults in a manner that's going to make a difference?
Yeah, it's a great question. So households that lock up their firearms and ammunition see a 85% fewer unintentional injuries. It's a huge number. And unintentional injuries, by the way, were up 30% nationwide in 2021. So I think, I mean, it's a tough question to really know the right now answer to, because right now is so different than it was even 2 years ago with the proliferation of guns that happened in Illinois in the last, 18 to 24 months. So I know I said this in our last meeting, but it's a statistic that just still blows my mind. Illinois accounted for 24% of all gun sales in the United States in 2021, and we're 4% of the population. It's just like staggering. So the way that the trajectory went in this state, like the data hasn't kept up with it to be able to fully understand what it means in terms of, child deaths, suicide, unintentional injuries.
Wow.
So
Those are just the registered gun sales, not the.
exactly. I mean, and we know that
What's really going on in the street.
yeah, so the guns that are coming in, I'm sure you are aware of this on a daily basis, but the guns that are involved in crimes in Chicago, 40% of them are coming from across our state lines, from Missouri and Indiana primarily, but like there's just a huge number of guns. So again, in the piece of legislation that they proposed, there's a commission and a lot of efforts that are supposed to be directed toward stemming the trafficked guns that come into Illinois. So that should help.
Chris, are you sort of getting at the question of how does a municipality like Winnetka educate? I mean, did you do it online? Do you have, I mean, you're not gonna have symposiums probably, you're gonna, I mean, are there programs out there that a
Yeah.
village like ours can
Sure.
adopt?
So yes, and I believe you're already working with the Be Smart program, and I know Wilmette and Glencoe are as well. So we have a sort of like a, I don't know, I don't want to call it unrelated because it's related, but we have an arm of Everytown called Be Smart, where we have trained people who go into everything from this room to PTO, to a book club, to, just lots of different libraries, to give presentations on how to be a responsible gun owner. And the really cool thing about the presentation is that the presumption is that people do own firearms. So it's like takes the politics out of it, and it just is purely education. And it's really easy for people to digest. It's like a 20-minute long presentation, and it sits really nicely alongside a quick presentation on the firearms restraining orders and how to, either presented by one of the police officers or also by one of the Be Smart presenters. One of the things that we see in Illinois that's really a problem is that we have this pretty strong firearms restraining order, infrastructure in place, but very few people know about it. I think Chief Hornstein is the exception in Illinois, and our municipality is the exception in really understanding how those are carried out. We even talked to like Chicago police officers who don't really understand who can petition an FRO, and then like how that takes place long term. So, I mean, yes, this is Winnetka. We don't see nearly as many issues, but we do have domestic abuse situations. We do have reasons that, firearms probably should be taken away from people. So getting people to know that these laws are there for their safety is important. And I think I heard that we had like less than 200 FROs be enacted in the last like 18 months, whereas like Florida has had 20,000 because they've done a really good job of educating people. And like, that's Florida. So, yeah. So yes, there's good education programs. And I think really like working even just with our schools and making the message consistent. I know that we had a message in one of our newsletters, which I got lots of people calling me saying, oh my God, did you see this? So like people do read them. I know maybe you don't feel like they do, but I swear they do read those newsletters. They need to figure out when their recycling days are or something, but they do read them. And I would love to see New Trier and some of the private high schools start working on this as well. So, you know, they have the platform to talk about mental wellness and secure gun storage and suicide and, you know, data, and they have the respect of the community like you guys do. So, yeah. That's all I got. You got
Thanks,
any more
Lauren.
questions for me?
Oh,
Happy
the
to-
conversation will continue. Anybody else
Okay,
like to add to what Lauren offered? Kim, welcome back, by the way.
Yeah.
Good to see you back in the room.
Happy to be here today. Listen to the study session.
I think I can speak for us all. We miss you.
I'm gonna speak up there too sometimes.
Not on Tuesdays.
Every other day.
President Rents, can I just?
Sure,
just
jump in.
A quick follow-up on what Lauren said. So you mentioned Be Smart. So we've absolutely engaged with them. There's currently a link on our website to their resources. I think you had asked about that, Trustee Derwin. The other thing too is that when we had our public safety open house in October, we invited Layla to come out as our local rep, and she did, and she set up a table, and it was very well received. So.
Yeah, fantastic.
And
It's such a good program.
And I told her we would look for more opportunities where we could partner with her if there's chances to speak to other groups and do additional outreach with it. So she's fantastic.
She's fantastic. I think the concern is that like sometimes the people who show up to those things are the ones that are most receptive to it. And what we really need to make sure is that we're catching everyone and that we continue the message that it gets spread to everyone, which is why I do think actually that the high school is one of the best catch-alls. Again, because of the age of the 14 to 18-year-old students and their, you know, their particular risk factors to suicide.
Well, to me, it seems like probably the biggest challenge is how do we connect with that 54% who don't store their firearms properly?
Is that a national statistic?
I don't know.
It is a national statistic. The thing that's particularly even more concerning, though, about Illinois is 20% of the firearms that were purchased, yes, 20% of the firearms that were purchased in Illinois were to first-time purchasers in 2021, which typically we see that the firearms that were purchased by first-time purchasers during COVID did not receive any training and did not purchase a safe. So, you know, that was like, I'll get to that later. You know, there's a pandemic, and so the concern is it might even be a more concerning number here. But we don't have the data because it's just like catching up right now. So it's a good question.
Well, I mean, I get the stat, and I guess I'd ask you, Chief. One of the reasons, at least I've heard anecdotally, is that if you truly have it for self-defense and you need it by the time you unlock it, it's, you know, that's what I've heard anecdotally. I don't know what the facts bear out, why people don't lock them if they really want access to them, if they feel they need access to them. I'm just curious.
It's personal to everybody. I mean, they make some fantastic, the technology is great, biometric safes out there, fantastic devices that you can literally access in the dark with a touch of a hand. And if it gives you that level of comfort to get to that firearm quickly, you can do it.
For $150.
Sure.
That's the thing that blows my mind. $150.
Yeah.
Pretty
It
good.
fits right in your nightstand. I mean,
Yeah.
it's as easy to access as though it were sitting out in the open practically. $150.
The thing that kills me is that the technology is there to have the biometrics right on the firearm. There should just be a fingerprint right there.
Well, there's a lawsuit,
Yeah.
right? So the gun industry is fighting to prevent that.
Yeah, which is why industry accountability
lawyers do their work.
Makes your product safer.
Yeah.
So, everybody mics on, please. Let's talk. What do you want to do?
Can I ask a quick question, though, about something Peter mentioned in the memo?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry,
Can I just,
it's
yeah.
conversation time, so just free form it.
Yeah, well, I thought it was interesting because our existing provisions under section 6, the surrender of handguns and ammunition, if we're, and maybe this is gonna create too much chaos, given what's going on, maybe with Springfield taking the lead on this, maybe not. My question was, if we have the ability, why wouldn't we expand it to all firearms, not just handguns? So to be assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. To have the ability, under the surrender of handguns and ammunition. I know we proposed some, kind of important changes to that. Or do we think that that's, maybe that's something we should consider, but we can wait a couple of weeks and see if Springfield.
I mean, that surrender provision, those surrender provisions are voluntary, so including.
Right.
Thank you. If your question is, can we include assault weapons in addition to handguns and ammunition, the answer is yes.
I don't know if anybody would surrender them, but I just thought it was kind of like, maybe think about including that.
From a practical standpoint, we do get people that voluntarily surrender long guns now that come in,
I would-
outside of handguns.
Right, okay, so long gun, I was wondering, that means anything that's not, is it the capacity or is it just?
Length of the barrel, essentially.
Okay.
Think of a shotgun, think of a rifle.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've had that for years, where people voluntarily give them up. Relative passes away and they want them destroyed.
Chief, do you handle, is the process the same, no matter what type of gun it is?
Yeah, process is the same. We take it in, it's cataloged, it's logged, it goes to the Northeastern Illinois Crime Lab. Usually once a year, they have a mass weapons destruction. Once it's destroyed, we get certification proof on, date and time of destruction that we keep for our records.
And it goes there to do ballistics tests to make sure it wasn't used in a crime, is that one?
Only if we request it.
Oh, okay,
So for them to do that for every single weapon that comes in would be
yeah,
overly burdensome.
yeah, especially now. I don't know, it was just a
Yeah,
minor
that's a
thing
good
that I was
point.
like, low-hanging fruit.
Well, in the context of trying to make some progress on this, as opposed to just sort of talking, which is good, because it's a complicated issue. I liked Peter's memo. I mean, I didn't find anything of his suggestions, whether it was wordsmithing or and instead of or. I think they were all good, and, we talked about tightening up our code on this, our ordinance and so on, and those would make sense. I think the fact that Illinois, that this is coming down the pike on the assault rifle ban and other provisions, FOID card, I mean, I don't know why we would wade into that independent with Illinois just coming down the pike. I mean, I think we should absolutely work on education, communication,
Safe storage.
whatever programs would be accessible and possible, to have our officers involved. We don't want to unduly burden their time, but I think we should try to do that. And I think we should very seriously consider amending our code to adopt some of these changes and see what happens in 2 or 3 weeks or the next few months on the assault rifles. And if nothing happens, we can revisit, but here's something we can do to make a statement. And, my position would be to move forward on some of that.
On Peter's suggestions.
On Peter's suggestions, and let's see where this Illinois thing goes. And let's work on education and communication regardless of where that goes. So,
Yeah.
Other thoughts?
No, I agree with Bob, and I also think, as far as the or, I would do the ands.
Yeah.
We're trying to make it, let's make it strict, as strict as we can, and we she feels makes sense.
I also thought we should increase the fine, but if we've never levied the fine, it's kind of a moot point. I mean, we've never,
Yeah, and if you increase it from 750 to 1,500,
It's-
what difference is that?
It's not gonna
And
change.
I just want to mention one other practical aspect too. If one of our officers encounters somebody who's in violation of unlawful transportation of a firearm, whatever firearm it is, handgun, assault rifle, whatever, the reality is they're going to charge under 24-1, which is state charge of UUW, because it's a crime. It's a crime. It's a crime. It's a jailable offense, and that's what we're going to charge. There would have to be some real mitigating circumstances for us to charge it under ordinance, and we can go with the bigger hammer. It's just reality.
I'm not sure. I think that's fine. I think we should wait for 3 weeks and see if they'll do the work for us. I don't know what we can do it sounds like there's not much we can do as far as discussion, or at least notice of red flag laws, what we can do to strengthen anything, and is it all just state level that anybody in this town that is deemed, there has to be counseling, there has to be mental health evaluation. I just think just focus on the guns without the red flagging, and the mental health issue is a real issue.
I don't think any state has mandatory mental health evaluation
There's something
before.
going on in New York. I'll just, maybe start,
I mean,
if we can look at that, I'll try and bring it in.
Europe does that in places, but I don't think New York has got that currently.
It's literally just I see the Wall Street or the New York Times today, it's finally getting some traction because there's been so many there's been so many killings. Look at the subway this year. A lot of mental health issues going on. So I'm not sure what can be done, but I would, anything that we can do to help strengthen that side of it would be good.
Sorry.
And I'm not sure what we can do, but I would be in favor of that.
This is probably the most frustrating subject matter I've ever dealt with at Village Council, because there aren't any really clear answers. There's not a lot of great ideas, because this whole thing is locked up in constitutional law at the end of the day, and we're only a town of 11,000 people, and we just don't have the bandwidth or the horsepower to really make a change that is going to be significant, except for the fact that we can make a statement about what our community believes. At least that's what I'm starting to feel like here. And I really hoped we could have pushed harder on the safe storage relative, but Chief, you pretty much let the air out of my balloon on that issue, because, like you said, anything that's worth charging somebody for, you're going to make sure he goes to jail, and you can't do that if you write him a ticket here in Winnetka for breaking our own little local ordinance, right? So
Well,
frustrating.
and I'm certainly supportive of safe storage and all that, but in our community, have we had a lot of issues, let's say, with parents calling concern that their child went to someone's home and a gun was available, or
Yes.
an accidental shooting?
Yes.
And okay. So we've had several calls like that?
Well, I
or-
didn't call the police, but my
Oh.
daughter went to a play date 10 years ago, and there was a handgun on the nightstand.
Ugh.
No, we hear it all the time. It is unfortunate.
And
Okay,
my
or-
daughter was
or
never going
uninten-
back.
Or, I think you mentioned a few things like unintentional discharge, or even homeowners using a handgun to protect them, or, I'm sorry, any kind of gun to protect themselves with an intruder or whatever. Have we had a lot of that?
No,
Okay,
no,
Thank goodness.
no.
yeah.
I can think,
didn't
no.
so, but I had to
no,
ask, because I don't know
can-
at all, yeah.
I can, again, anecdotally, I can think of one case report we had in the last 15 years of a accidental discharge by a resident who owned a handgun.
But we do have, at least a student, I would say, every other year who attempts suicide with a firearm or without a firearm. And the presence of the firearm increases the incidence of death. I'm sure I gave you guys the statistic, but if a firearm is used in a suicide, there's over 90%
I was gonna say, I need to clarify this, okay? We're not getting calls every other year of a young person trying to kill themselves with a firearm. We're not.
But we do unfortunately have a problem with teens attempting suicide. And so I guess the question is, if we are in a situation where we can prevent even just one, I'm sure that everybody in this room would want to prevent a child at New Trier or at Washburn from committing suicide. And it is a fairly high statistic, you know, that if the firearm's not in the house, that's not gonna happen. Seems like it's an easy thing for us to do to protect kids, especially when they're not well right now. You know.
I don't want to digress the conversation, but just our experience for where young people have attempted suicide has typically not been with a firearm.
Sure, yeah, which is, that's a good thing, and they're not successful, right, exactly. I mean, I told you guys in my last time here, there's a child that I know very, very well who attempted suicide with 40 Benadryls just a few months ago. And, you know, there was not a firearm in the home, but I'm sure she would have used it if there had been. We'll never know, but there wasn't, and that's a happy ending. A tragic middle, but it had a happy ending.
Is there anything locally that could be done? Like you said, if a kid goes to a house and sees a gun out, can anything locally be set, some kind of ordinance or something?
We'll
That
say
if
storage,
it's
maybe.
reported, that it's out there for my kid to go see at a neighbor's house? Is there anything like that on the records of anywhere?
Yeah, so in Illinois, if you are required by law, actually, in Illinois, so there are 23 states that have safe gun storage laws. Illinois is one of them, actually. But the difference between all the different states that have these laws is the age that they define a child as. So California says a child is 18 and under.
14.
Illinois says a child is 14 and under. So you actually are legally required to have your gun safely stored in Illinois. You are reasonably expected to have a child under the age of 14 in your home. If you're a child, or, you know, if you're a grandparent, it could be your grandkids. If it's a reasonable expectation, you have to have a gun in a
So in your case, 10 years ago, probably under the age of 14.
Yeah, and I just think it's more
14,
common today, from what I understand with my younger, we're friends with, you know, school-age kids, that people are very upfront now about asking, you know, do you have fire?
Yeah.
You know, I was like we moved from Seattle and that was what you did. And when I moved here, I remember people were like, what? You asked that question? I think it's more common now, right?
I would agree.
I think it's because the proliferation of gun ownership has just skyrocketed.
So if it is a law, even under 14.
Yeah, I didn't even know that.
Has it ever come up that anyone's ever reported that to you? Or do they not know about it?
It's a very difficult law. Remember I mentioned that Chicago had this law that they're not enforcing?
Right.
It's a counterpart to the state law. Chicago's is 18, not just 14. Chicago's standard is also far easier. Chicago's standard has to be accessible, reasonably accessible. The Illinois statute, you have to basically know that 14 or 14-year-old is going to do something dangerous. Like there's an extra.
It's not just the presence.
It's not just the presence under the state statute. It's a difficult statute.
It's a Class C misdemeanor.
It's a what?
It's a Class C misdemeanor.
Yeah.
But I think that's part of the education, right?
I agree.
That there
I
is,
agree.
right, that there is a statute
Yeah,
there
I
and
don't think
that,
people just know. I mean,
oh, I think that's right.
yeah, I think you're right. It should be education. I think people are gonna do bad things, are gonna do the bad things. It's the other ones that are the accidentals that are, the ones that we can't affect, because people just don't know.
Yeah,
I think-
I think there are a lot of people who feel comfortable asking the question. I think there are still a lot of people who don't, and I understand that. It's awkward. I mean, I live and breathe this work, and I still would dread making that phone call if my kids were young, right?
Well-
I mean, it's,
And I think it's harder now because it has become so politicized. I think it wasn't before. You know, 20 years ago, you could just say, hey, you know, do you guys have guns? Are they locked, right? You know?
But that, you know
Now-
what, that's one of the advantages of what Layla's work is with BSmart. So BSmart actually they actually provide scripts to parents for this exact thing that you're talking about. So they provide tools, you know, because that conversation is very difficult.
It is.
And people don't know what to say, and that's one of the advantages of that, is they actually coach you and give you scripts on how to ask those difficult questions.
Yeah.
And the more people ask, the more normal the conversation becomes, and then it's just not a typical, like, third rail, right?
And-
That's the ultimate goal. We just don't want it to be a third rail. It should be something that you can ask, just like, you know, does your kid have a peanut allergy?
Exactly.
But I can see some people responding to that question, you know, defensively, and then the kids have to deal with it at school, and you don't want to narc on someone that's your friend. I mean,
Yeah.
that's hard, even with a kid that might be mentally at question to have a gun. You know, it's so hard
Yeah.
to report that person and confront them.
Chief, what happens if New Trier or District 36 finds out that a student has, may pose a threat to themselves or others? They've either made threats or they're acting in a threatening way. Does that information necessarily come to you? Does it randomly come to you?
Yeah, and that's the beauty of those reciprocal reporting agreements that we have with them, is for those very reasons. So we have threat assessment teams, and, you know, if there's anything that's deemed a threat, it's gonna get reported to us. And getting reported is one thing, and taking action is another, right?
Right.
Just because somebody reports it doesn't mean we're running off and hauling somebody away. It triggers that triage of the following steps that need to be followed collaboratively. So, yes.
Is part of that checking to see if there is a firearm in the home?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I can tell you, you know, there's been instances where we've investigated instances like that and gone to homes. Or if it was a student that went to New Trier but resides in another community, we've worked with that neighboring jurisdiction and asked them, or gone with that neighboring jurisdiction to that home and gain the cooperation of the people that live there to determine if there was a threat or not. Mm-hmm, yep.
And what about with instances of domestic violence? Is it sort of ordinary course to check when there's a report of domestic violence, whether there's a firearm in the home, or?
Yeah, I mean, anytime we're going into that situation, I mean, that's one of the first things we're trying to screen for, is the dispatchers trying to screen for that initially. And then if circumstances arise where there's an arrest made, well, then it's immediately in the court system, and a judge is immediately invoking restrictions.
And then kind of the longer term part of this, and kind of the troubling pattern seems to be consistent with mass shootings. There's like some early warning signs, right? And then the thing happens quite a bit later. You know, could be 6 months, could be a year, because there's a digression that happens with that person. There's planning that happens with that person. What, if anything, can or is done to sort of maintain some intelligence on, frankly, people that need watching?
So, first off, what you're describing is leakage.
Yeah.
So you look at any of these case studies, anybody can go back and say there were signs.
Yeah.
And people either ignored them, didn't act on them, deliberately stuck their heads in the sand. You know, knock on wood, fortunately, you know, this community has been really good about that. You know, where we've, you know, see something, say something, report it, kind of thing. I'm sorry, give me the second part of that again, Trustee Kripe.
Sort of how are these situations monitored?
So I can't speak for the schools.
Yeah.
Right, and because that's typically what you're talking about,
Yeah.
is what they're doing. You know, we're a small department. Look, if we're going to a home for certain reasons, if someone's involved in an investigation, you know, information is shared internally within the police department lawfully. And we know, and we're aware of, you know, what might be going on.
Yeah.
The schools will have their own protocols as far as what they're doing to ensure that student is provided with appropriate resources and followed up upon. So,
Is there something we can do, frankly, to force the issue more with the schools? and maybe this is more of a question for Peter. And I'll be candid, my own personal experiences with the schools. There appears to be a tendency to want to manage things that frankly is beyond their pay grade. They don't know what the hell they're doing. They don't have the resources. They are very good at some things up to a point. And my concern is that it only takes one fucked up screwball and we're all gonna be saying, why didn't we do this? And so what I'm saying is, like, let's put ourselves in that time machine, imagine the screwed up, kid, and imagine for a moment that our school districts, as good as they are at educating and trying to develop our kids, that they sit on it, they manage it, they think they've got it. Doesn't make it to the police department, the situation isn't monitored. Therefore, no one has ever checked, is there a firearm, right? Did their father, swear a FOIA card for them? Or did we just dismiss it because there was not an overt threat, right? Is that like this bright line that we're kind of lulling ourselves into thinking, well, then therefore they're not a problem? And I'd be interested in understanding what we can do in terms of ordinances on that front, because that is something that's uniquely local. And maybe you're gonna tell me there's not a lot we can do.
I mean, to your point, and are you saying that if, and I don't even know if this is the case, if there is, are you notified on any type of potential serious, what is serious behavior? What would be serious enough for you to be contacted by the school? I think that's exactly right. Maybe it's, we take down what is reported to a lower level.
If the school becomes aware of a potential imminent threat to the student populace or the faculty, by virtue of the agreements that we have with them, that council has approved all those, and their school board has approved this as well, they have to report it.
The imminence is the key word to me.
Well,
I'd like it before it's imminent.
we'd have to go through the entire document and look at, there's a multitude of offenses that are
Okay.
listed on there.
Okay.
It's a thick document, but to your point about, hey, we're concerned something really bad could happen, are they, if somebody's bearing that, that's a problem, and it's a violation of the agreement. I can't say that, I'm aware that there's been any situation to that extent that's ever been buried. There's a reason we have a school resource officer over there.
Yeah.
Right? Again, do schools handle certain things on their own? Sure they do. But for things that rise to that level that potentially could be a threat to the student population, the faculty, absolutely the expectation is that they're coming to us with us, yes.
Other than by a cooperation agreement though, Peter, is there anything that can be done by ordinance, or is that all subject to the state education authority?
I'd have to look, but I think I can't.
Could we say in other words, exercise it under the sort of on the basis that if it's occurring in our corporate boundaries,
Just a reporting requirement.
a reporting requirement? And
Even when with a little difficulty, even if it's within our corporate boundaries, there is separate unit of government,
Right.
and more importantly, there is separate unit of government that extends beyond our borders, right?
Right.
That district is not just coterminous when that happens.
but if a crime is committed within the school, that's still within our jurisdiction, right?
Right, well, crime is different, you're not talking about a crime.
Well,
I mean, I think,
assault
yeah.
is a crime.
It-
Right, well, then you would be notified of the agreement, so.
Well, and I think there's also this thing where I'm worried about having, it feels like there's this line where we're dealing with juveniles, right? And parents can become super protective to that, right? And then they clamp down and they don't want, they're gonna take control and they're gonna threaten lawsuits and things. And on one hand, it almost is like we have to give space. And I don't know what the right answer is, because I think the schools are good at giving kids space to make mistakes, and then we have a peer jury situation for the township, at least for high school, I think. You want to create an open enough environment where people feel like if like I know, like if I was in a situation, I would want to be able to go to the police or to the school and say, look, I think I've got a problem. Whereas I think if we come up with too restrictive sometimes of requirements, it can chill that effect, right? And make people feel like, well, I can't report my own child because then, you know, all these bad things happen, right?
But usually here, to your point, I think it's a great point, but if you just look at the situation that happened in the park,
Oh, yeah.
you can't tell me that was the first time that something ever happened with these kids that didn't raise the concern. And what happens is that obviously parents, I get it, they're very protective, they don't want their kid to have a record or be under watch. But to your point, if there's something that, what's the threshold where disturbing behavior doesn't result in something like that? Something had to be there before,
Or that there's an intervention,
yes.
right? That doesn't just continue, right?
One of the other things that we've talked about with the schools is, and I would love to hear like a legal perspective on this, is what in a file for an 8th grader gets passed on to a freshman advisor? Because to your point, I think it's really, like our schools do a really good job of protecting a child's ability to have a fresh start
Yeah.
in high school. And there's something so great about that, except when it's not. And so I guess the question is like, if there are these high-risk individuals that we've seen some of these incidents play out pretty publicly in the last couple months, you know, what does go to New Trier or to Loyola or whatever with them? And what type of extra resources can we encourage as a village or as a culture in our town to make sure that the resources travel with them as well so that they don't become, you know, a bigger issue? Because like there is a world in which we've wrapped around those families as a community and we encourage them to just say, oh my God, our children massively screwed up, but
Right.
you know, here are the things that we're doing to make sure that that never happens again, versus lawsuits and
Right.
you know, plant big like there's two different cultures that a town can have, and
Right.
I personally would love to think that we live in a town that would wrap around those families and say, oh my gosh, everyone makes mistakes, those were big ones, but here's the path out of that doghouse.
I think there's a pretty clear line. I mean, if you take a do not enter sign or, you know, a street sign when you're 12 years old, that's one thing. If it's aggression towards others, and I mean, I don't think it's that hard a line to really figure out. I really don't. And that's my concern is if you talk to some of these psychologists and mental health, it's when they start showing aggression and towards others, and those are things that have to be watched. It's a whole different,
Well, I think Lauren's got a good point, though. I think the dossier that goes from school to
Yeah.
New Trier, I think is a really good because I'm reflecting back on when my kids went to high school, it was really upon the parent to self-report, right? And I don't know what kind of information, you know, and that's that fine balancing line of, you know, giving people the opportunity to make mistakes grow, but, you know,
And I
what
don't-
is the category?
I don't think it's a lot, because I have had a conversation with a New Trier teacher who is a freshman advisor who has an 8th grader and knows a lot of the backstory, and it's her belief that that does not travel to New Trier. So that's just
Sure.
a strange and unique experience that we had with that person to speak to that specifically. But yeah, so I don't think it's quite as robust of a file that, you know, should follow some kids.
One of the things that wasn't totally clearly answered, I think, with Andy's question, you know, you have an incident, you believe it's all handled, but let's pretend that the kid now just goes in his room for 6 months, planning this whole thing, and then bam, does something bad. How is that tracked? Is there any social media that you people are checking? Is that legal? I mean, sometimes you see
Social
stuff,
media is
oh, you know,
legal.
if you look at their Facebook after the fact, it's like, geez, how come someone didn't see this?
Well, like the
So
Highland Park
that's-
guy was rapping about it.
Right, I mean, if I'm gonna get in trouble, I'm gonna be quiet for 6 months and kind of be the good kid.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I think as a society, we trust that parents are gonna do the thing, right?
Or they think they are.
Or they, yeah, or
Right, I
they
mean, I'm not
think,
saying
right,
it's always
right, they think
bad.
they've got it covered. I mean, I think is it Dylan Klebold's mother, he was the Columbine shooter. She's written some really interesting things and really heartfelt of really supposedly being completely blindsided. And so I do think that that's an issue, right?
Right, and how do you track that
And
months after?
I mean, the concern I have is we have overlapping responsibilities, but there's a gap.
Oh, yeah, clearly.
And if you ask the school to define what their responsibility is in this area, I think they will get a different answer than what a community would want to hear, which is to ensure the safety of the community. That's not probably going to be their answer. Their answer is probably going to be more focused on the welfare of the student, which is good. And I accept and agree with your point about we don't want to do things that will have a chilling effect. But I do feel like there is a gap.
Go ahead, jump in.
There was a, I think we heard a story anecdotally that you were saying how there was a lawsuit that ended up happening years ago about the school taking a firm stance and they're not responsible for anything that happens outside of school property, which a kid goes from school to home and once they get home, to your point, if there's this gap and school didn't report to you that there was not an imminent threat, there's that concern of them who's watching at home. So I'm not sure.
Oh, yeah, no, that did happen, and it was a couple years above my oldest daughter, but she was in the school system. Yeah, and I think that's maybe also part of an education thing that we need to focus on, is to get parents, and in that case, and I think this plays out many times over in many different ways, that student was, potentially a D1 athlete, right? And actually did go on to be a D1 athlete. And so there was all these concerns about scholarships, right? And I think that if we kind of open up the discussion and figure out how to close the gap, but still create an opportunity to educate parents. Like, you don't want to be the Crumleys or whatever, in Michigan, right? Sitting there in court, arrested, in jail. And I feel like New Trier does a really awesome job, and I think the police districts do as well, of scaring parents about their liability if they host a party. They bring in that judge from Lake County, right, and he talks to all the parents and all the kids. The one that threw the parents in jail like 25 years ago or something. Like, that does an effective job. Not perfect, right? There's still parents who host parties, I'm sure. But no personal experience of not knowing anything. So, but I'm sure it's not 100%, but I think it does do a great job of educating parents as to what their liability will be even if you go to bed and go to sleep and there's kids in your house drinking, what will happen to you? I feel like if we can do the same thing around guns and kind of mental health awareness to get parents to understand that we have a societal responsibility to make sure that our kids
and also where to go, Tina. I mean, because I think most of these people don't even know where to go for mental health.
Well, the schools do a really great job.
Schools should do that, right? Great.
I mean, at least Winnetka does. I can't really speak to other school districts, but there's now a whole component of the curriculum on social, emotional well-being. I think we've heard about. I think the kids start learning about Erica's Lighthouse like in 4th grade, and that's also shared with parents in the district.
So it's interesting. Speaking with Superintendent Tess recently, she indicated that the resources are not the problem in the cases for the kids that she wishes would get resources. Frequently, it's the parents who are resistant to their child taking advantage of the resources. So there's like a sort of a stigma attached to the need for mental wellness, and even though the school has it to provide, it's not always being taken advantage of. So when I asked her what could we do to help, she was like, you can make people realize that that's the thing that they want for their kid.
Right.
Right? Which is really hard to do.
No,
Okay.
right, because I think there's a lot of stigma. They're afraid of it being on the record. I mean, I've had friends who've told me, yeah, my daughter's going to therapy, but we don't want her talking to the school psychologist, right? Because they don't want it on their academic record. And I think there's, in addition to closing the gap, if there's ways for us to more normalize it and get it, as part of the education aspect, to get people realizing that, it's not a black mark on your record preventing you from playing, you know, being a D1 swimmer somewhere. I'm just throwing that out. That's not the person. Anyway.
I think we're drifting a little off course
I
here.
was gonna say-
I do have an idea, though, that I'd like to throw out on the table, and, you know, it feels like a feeble attempt at trying to do something, which I always hate, but given the subject matter, given what we experienced last summer, given what we've heard from the community, the one thing I think everybody in this room sounds like they agree on is the fact that there's an educational component that's a very important part of this. Seems to be something that the advocates are supporting as well, and maybe that's the place to start. And even though I abhor the idea of creating a committee, and Rob's going to jump up and run away because he thinks he's going to have to put a staff person on it, so, which will probably be Brian. Sorry about that. Welcome to the big times. But it seems to me that potentially forming an ad hoc committee that includes the police department, concerned residents, members from New Trier, D36, and have them work on creating an educational program that we can roll out to the community that's going to have some form and some substance and some repeatability, because I think that's the most important thing with this message. You can say it once, you can say it twice, yeah, you know, but the thing is to be able to have something that you just keep out there in the public consciousness so that they're thinking about it, and it becomes a topic that's more comfortable to have conversations about, and maybe respond in positive ways by doing something as simple as dropping $150 on a safe you can keep next to your bedstand. You know, I mean, these aren't rocket science principles here. They're all really simple. You know, and anybody with long guns, march up over to Harbor Freight, and for $300 you can have a safe that's good enough to keep the kids out, right?
Costco has them.
And you can put 50 guns in there if you want to. I mean, they're good-sized pieces of equipment. So we're not talking about people spending lots of money to do the right thing, but I think the idea is to create a program that helps create a desirability for doing the right thing, and thinking more broadly about the community, that, well, my house, my gun, my dresser drawer, that's fine with me. You know, helping people understand that sometimes these decisions that people make in their bedrooms or their basements are actually things that can affect the community at large once those weapons leave the house. And I think a lot of it, you know, we have a lot of good thinking people in this town, and I think sometimes just putting the issues out there in front of them and showing them a path to something that's going to solve a problem might be enough to get us going in the right direction.
I like that. And part of the education, I don't know what the current statistics are, but a lot of guns that aren't safely stored are then stolen and used to commit other crimes, and that's a huge issue. And that's, I think, part of that whole education.
Has
Yeah,
that
and
been an
it's just-
issue here?
So, it's a really good point that you raised. I'm glad you brought that up. So, it's not been a problem here, which is a great thing. However, you know, we are tuned in with all the other area law enforcement agencies, and we see all the other area bulletins, and you will, you know, on occasion see residential burglary out of, pick your suburb. Stolen in the burglary was, and a list of the weapons, you know, not stored in a safe, and those guns are out there.
Yep.
So how'd you like to be that homeowner and your gun is now used to kill somebody?
Brutal.
I can't remember what the statistic, when I was a baby lawyer and I was doing had to take a rotation on prosecution, it was pretty high in Washington State. But, you know, that's 35 years ago, so I don't know.
People live in their cars too.
Or the purses
Also really crazy.
without
And
permits.
sometimes people have
Yeah.
neglected to lock their cars. Myself being one of them, so.
I'm okay with an educational type of
I
push.
know.
I mean-
I got a wording recently. It feels sometimes.
Right, I mean, put together a committee
It's
of
apple pie
thoughtful
and mother
people
and-
that really are focused on the
Do
issue.
have a couple gun owners on the committee too.
Oh,
though, 'cause if
definitely.
it's- Because you said concerned residents, I mean, I'd also want people who can speak firsthand. to
Well,
what
I'm
it
sure
is.
there's concerned residents that have guns.
Yeah, that, I know,
Okay,
I was just gonna
absolutely.
make sure that that umbrella
Of course.
included, or suggest that that was the
I
case.
mean,
Probably.
So I like Peter's recommendations. I like the education thing. I would encourage us to
Gap.
look at the gap.
Yeah.
You know, this is something I do for companies all the time with compliance programs. And usually I'm hired by a board to come in, and management will say, here's our, you know, compliance reporting process. And first thing I look at is, where is management making subjective judgments where people are reporting issues that might implicate management? And let's figure out the process for those. And I can't help but think that the current situation with our schools and the level of reporting is very analogous to that. And we have had a mature student go very bad.
Yeah.
This isn't hypothetical. It has happened here before. It will happen again.
And I
It's
would
just a
say
matter
that
of time.
The gap at New Trier is probably more with regard to suicide. That would be my big concern, is that New Trier is not great at identifying the kid who doesn't fit into a particular profile of students that look like they're going to commit suicide. There are kids that are just really good at putting on a perfect face that are at high risk. So I don't know how you catch that.
That's a big ask.
That's a really, really difficult thing, but if you wonder where the gap is at New Trier, that's where.
Well, and again, if we set up a committee and it's functional and it does a good job on the educating piece, there's nothing wrong with council expanding their purview to start probing. And the good news is I'll call Paul Sally and tell him, I want you to send somebody to be on this committee. You know, I'll call Kelly and make sure that she's got somebody on this committee. And, you know, it'll be a group that can evolve over time and start to address some of these, I don't want to call them ancillary or side issues, because they are central to the whole thing, but
So I'll just tell you, the reason I brought up the social worker during the budget process is because that gap scenario I was talking about, where basically management is making subjective judgments about things implicating management. One of the things that you do, and I don't know who said this, but we talk about the idea of making reporting more routine.
Yeah.
So that
Normalizing
it's
it.
sort of always happening. You don't
Yeah.
have to
Yeah.
force the school district to make a subjective judgment that this person is blah, 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 blah. So one of the mechanisms potentially you create is just if there is threatening behavior, not if there's an imminent threat, but just if there's troubling behavior, that there will be a consultation with, you know, maybe we beef up our social, I mean, it would be a big ad. It would be a lot of time, I would think. But the school district social workers, when they're dealing with people that potentially are posing a threat to themselves or others, they at least consult with someone outside of the district, and it's got to be us. I think it's got to be. And it's probably not a law enforcement. It's probably a social worker employed through the police department.
But then it's cloaked under the juvenile protection statute.
Right, so you
versus
keep it
the
privileged.
education, which I like.
You keep
right.
it privileged. You don't
Yeah.
create the chilling effect.
Yeah.
And you take the school district out of the threat of litigation if they
Right.
consult with the police, because it's just a routine, this is our
In law,
process.
yeah.
So maybe it's something that could be
That's a great
implemented
idea.
through an expanded IGA. But I just think that could be helpful, just having that engagement. Because I do think that the school district doesn't view their remit as extending beyond their walls.
Well, and I think they've been sued, right?
Yeah.
At least I've lived here 16 years. At least 3 lawsuits I knew were either threatened or filed in that short period of time over trying to, you know, do the right thing, so
Yeah.
to speak, what we would think is the right thing by kind of helping. So I think, you know, and that's just the fact of where we live. Everybody's going to protect their kid, but if we so I think they're reluctant to go down that path.
Well, and they're put in a very difficult situation, which is either try to dress the thing up and make it worse so it fits a crime, and then we have, you know, or it's not routine. So they're put in this very impossible kind of situation in exactly the scenario that we know we need to address. And frankly, I think the gun storage and all those other things are really important, but guns aren't going anywhere in this country. They're all over the place. So I think the thing that we probably can control the most at the local level is looking for the people that could be using those guns and trying to intervene and help there. And right now, I think we've got good cooperation, but I think because of the way this thing is evolved, there may be a gap worth exploring.
I
And
like
so
that idea.
if there's a committee that is reviewing that, great, get the school district involved. But
It may
yeah.
give them they make, by,
Take the pressure off.
yeah, exactly. Get them
Yeah,
out of the hot seat.
And I think, the important thing from my perspective is you got to get the conversation open and the people at the table. The one thing that Rob will vouch for, and I've observed it firsthand, and Andy, I think you do, you have as well, as we went through stormwater. All of these other taxing bodies are very insular.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't want anybody sticking their nose in their business. And the schools are very much that way, and even the park district was that way. So, I mean, it's not like we haven't seen this behavior, and I think part of it is breaking down those walls so people feel comfortable having the conversations, opening the issues up, and then moving together. So I think there might be some power in it, even though I don't particularly care for committee work. We'll just have to be really very careful and diligent in making sure we have good thinkers at the table who aren't going to take this in a self-serving direction.
I think we want them to come back with a deliverable, which is
Yeah.
a community violence prevention plan
Mm-hmm.
that has the participation of the school districts and the village and probably the park district, and groups,
And maybe the township.
yeah, the township,
I
the
mean-
county, we'd welcome the NRA if they have it, because they should have a lot of insight in this. They've stood by enough. And Moms Demand Action and come up with a true plan. I mean, that's what we would do if I was brought in by a board.
Mm-hmm.
What's the plan? What's the playbook? And maybe there would be then specific recommendations that would flow out of that.
Yeah,
And
that's what
private-
we'd be hoping for.
In private schools?
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
Oh, definitely. I
Probably
mean,
not outside of Winnetka, right? Because we don't.
no, we'll get North Shore
We can't,
involved and,
yeah.
But I know, yeah,
and any others. Faith, Hope,
yeah,
I mean, get them all in. I
Yeah.
mean, you want to make sure that the group doesn't get too unwieldy, because then they never get anything done. But we'll be,
Right.
again, just a representative from each individual and a couple at large, I think, could move the ball and at least create a think tank that some of these ideas can flow out of, and then maybe we have something actionable at the end of the day.
yeah, I mean, because obviously what happened here for 4th of July is obviously very impactful, but it happened 6 months prior or 9 months prior in Oxford, Michigan, right? And both those situations are very similar of where, and as a community, I think if we get ahead of the curve and start thinking about how to close those gaps, right? And not be stuck in our lanes too much.
And I think getting a repeatable, digestible, meaning not obnoxious message that gets out there and continues to feed the conversation from that side as well, so.
Yeah.
Do we need to do anything to memorialize this, or is this
No.
kind of, yeah?
We got note takers, and I'll start working on the committee. If you guys got ideas for people you think that would be good people on that, we'll start putting together a group and see what we come up with from there.
Okay, good.
So,
I still think, Chris, that we should,
oh, that's definitely part of the
this.
program, yeah.
I think the here and now, Peter can amend the ordinance and we can look
Yeah.
at the amendment
I agree.
and we can vote on it
Correct.
in the quarterly communications or the weekly communications. I think we can have some recap on maybe steal some language on safe storage and so on and start disseminating.
Yep.
Because this commission you're talking about is not going to come up with something
Oh, no,
in short order.
no.
So we should be doing some of this right now, I believe.
We don't want anything in short order because we want it well
Right.
thought.
But we can do this ordinance.
Sure.
We can filter out some communication on the topic
And enable a committee.
and enable a committee.
That sounds like
How
a
would you
plan
do
to
that,
me.
Peter? Would you?
The committee?
No. Adopt your,
Be an ordinance amending the municipal code.
and just kind of lift your suggestions. I don't think there was any objection that I heard on any of that.
Yeah, no, I mean, he had them, he had the
One
draft
one is
language.
outlined, but the other ones are just verbiage that you'd have to translate into an actual, yeah.
Yeah.
None of them are significant, so that could be January.
Good,
It was a really good review.
yeah.
Yeah, thank
Very
you.
good, thank you.
Anything else, guys?
Nope.
No, and
Mark,
also in the
we
social
are gonna
packet,
miss
I
you
thought
very-
the social worker summary was excellent.
Yeah.
That was
Yes.
really very, very
Yep.
helpful. In fact, I suggest it goes into like new trustee manuals or anything.
Let me,
No, I mean, really, because it's great information. to have
you know
in-
what? Let me pass that credit along to those two right there.
Okay.
So,
Thank
Cynthia
you.
Plazas, our social worker, okay?
Oh, you're here.
And our administrative services manager, Carrie Kaup, were, they were the engine behind that, so.
You can't hide behind the podium, otherwise we don't get to talk to you.
Thank you, it was excellent. really.
Yeah.
Really well done.
And that can be something in our quarterly.
Well, can I ask her a question?
No, we're gonna adjourn.
All right,
You can
all
ask
right.
her afterward.
You can ask her afterwards.
Okay, all right.
You better have a hot cup of coffee there, it's gonna be a while.
No, I still haven't had dinner, so I'm
So,
Low
but Mark,
glycemic.
I mean, back to it, we're gonna miss you. I mean,
Yeah.
I was broken when I heard you were leaving, because what I've seen from you, and I think what anybody who has interacted with the Winnetka Police Department since you've taken the helm, have been nothing but impressed and really awestruck by the human way that you approach your assignment. And there's not a lot of people like you out there. I'll never forget sitting at the Black Lives Matter event, and the first thing they said on that microphone was they were pointing right at you, and they said, "We're not talking about him." Remember? And that's a group that didn't have any reason to say anything nice about a police officer on that day, and yet that was the first thing that they did, was to call out how professional, how excellent you and all the folks in the department were, and how well you handled a really difficult situation. Never forget it. It's one of those snapshot moments that's just gonna stick in the back of my mind for as long as I live, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Look, it's a really, been here most of my adult life, almost 30 years, and it's a really, really difficult decision. It's been, I don't want to steal my retirement speech, but look, President Rintz, thank you very much for those comments. I greatly appreciate the support I've gotten from you and the entire council over the last 5.5 years. It's been an absolute honor to be the chief of police in this community. And it's tough to walk away from it, believe me. It is. But know that Deputy Chief O'Connell is going to do a fantastic job, okay? Lauren, you were complimenting me earlier. I appreciate that. Thank you. Know that DC O'Connell is very much up to speed in all the laws, too. We have great leadership in the department, and they're not going to miss a beat. They're not going to miss a beat. Matter of fact, I'll be more comfortable because I won't be complaining about the temperature being, keeping the heat up all the time. Now they can get the temperature just the way they
Wait a
want.
minute, we just
Wait,
approved
we
a,
did-
Yeah, I know.
$500
that's-
million.
I know.
Thank God.
I know.
And it was all because of you.
It's not done yet, right? It's not done yet, right?
No, it's lots of noise going on over there as we speak.
You can't even stick around and enjoy the fruits of your labor, so. Anyway,
Yeah,
But
just
thank you.
real quick, Mark, thank you. All the department heads really cherish the relationship they have with you, and I've really appreciated the support that you've given me over the years, too. So we're going to miss you, and we'll have more fun in January on your party.
maybe we can get together and wrench after you get out of here, too.
There is going to be a out of the village retirement party after
All right.
the 5th, so
Looking forward to that.
I just want to ride along. Please ride along. I'm trying to
can do
get
that.
that off.
we can get a ride along.
All right, good.
Yeah.
In handcuffs.
I'm like the other ride along.
Thank you, Rob. No, thank you for all your support, and it's been an honor. It's more than I ever could have dreamed of.
You've
That's for sure.
definitely set a new standard in this town, and one that we're not going to let go of very easily. So thanks, Mark. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
So, all right, well, I think we've done a pretty good amount of work this evening. So can somebody provide me with a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We stand adjourned. Thank you.